Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Fringe Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today, for the second time this week, I'm joined by Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you doing, sir?
How's it, Nick?
And also for the second time this week, Mr. Hermann Pretorius. Hermann, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thanks. I must say it's the exact same cast. It's like these aged old actors returning for Jurassic Park 16 or something, tempted by a paycheck, but not necessarily a great script. So here we are.
Is it not also because our fans were clamoring? It's like that's why they made the sequels.
Yes, that's why.
So many people wanted. They wanted to see Luke Skywalker again.
Let's just hope that this doesn't end up being like the Star Wars holiday.
You can be you're more like Jar Jar Binks, I think, Hermann. You can be Jar Jar Binks.
It's racist.
Let's hope this just doesn't end up like the Star Wars holiday special. Anything about it's a very bad thing. Anyway,
sorry guys.
Let's
cancel the singing Ewoks.
Okay, let's start with our first story today, and it is the first day of winter, I believe, officially today, 1st of June. And it is already a little bit chilly up here in Joburg, which I think we should start off with a nice, interesting story. And this is about the University of Johannesburg. So apparently some researchers from the University of Johannesburg have developed a 3D printing technique to build government-funded houses in one day. The UJ School of Civil Engineering and the Built Environment is working on a pilot project for the National Science and Innovation Department, which is looking into the prospect of using 3D printing for constructing RDP houses as part of the government's housing program for people without formal housing. UJ Vice Chancellor has tweeted out some videos of this project showing the 3D printer in action. And according to the Vice Chancellor, the machine could print an RDP house with 6 rooms in one day. She went on to say, if we invest in this technology, we can provide our people with decent housing fast and end informality. Apparently, houses can be built in as little as 5 hours, depending on the thickness of the walls. The research team has been talking about the benefits of 3D printing houses, that apparently there's an enormous amount of flexibility, that you can build with extreme precision. And there's also, of course, reduced risks to people on site because, people don't have bricks and stuff falling on them. And of course, the other great benefit of this procedure is that it is supposedly up to a third cheaper than current construction methods. So these 3D printed houses are normally made out of concrete, fiber, sand, and geopolymers. And there have been a lot of experiments across the world. There was one recently in Denmark. In China, there was an entire apartment block built by a 3D printer. And the situation with RDP houses is, let's just say that government has a daunting task. Despite building about 2.6 million RDP houses 3 million RDP houses between 1995 and 2015, there's a backlog in 2020 of 2.6 million. So government is really behind. And we mentioned this the other day. I think it's not really a sustainable thing. So it's difficult to say whether this project would make a huge difference. It's still quite new, early technology. But Marius, this is your university. You're very pleased by this today, aren't you?
Oh, I went to it when I was still old, the RAU, old RAU back in the day. I didn't go near the engineering department really. I was more in the humanities side of things. But yeah, I think Michelle Grobler asked a very good question. I'm actually not too sure, and I think that is a good question. But also, it doesn't really help. It also depends where these houses are actually going to be built, because I've mentioned before, the government says actually that has been actually one of the successes of the post-apartheid government. It's done actually pretty well in providing housing for people. If you look at the stats, it's built so many more houses. But the problem is a lot of these houses, or a lot of the places where these houses are built, are still on the outskirts of towns and cities. They're still far away from employment opportunities. They're still far away from schools and what have you. So a lot of people, even though they might have access to RDP house, they might have been given one or inherited one or maybe something like that, they still prefer to go live in informal settlements with all the problems that come with it, lack of sanitation and illnesses and crime. And, when it rains, obviously, not nice to be in an informal settlement. But for a lot of people, that's they weigh up the advantages and disadvantages. And for them, they'd much rather be, a 20-minute taxi ride away from, a busy part of town where there's lots of work opportunities or lots of people where they can maybe start a business or sell things and whatever you. So I think that's the key thing. We can build. I mean, this is a great initiative. It's obviously much cheaper to construct these houses than ordinary RDP house and so on. But if they still, if they're getting built in the middle of nowhere, or if they're 60 k's away from the nearest biggish place, it doesn't really help much. And it's not really going to change people's lives in any way, in reality.
So I see in the comments people are raising some very important aspects about this. One of them is that, of course, you can build the shell of a 3D house, but you still then have to come and put the infrastructure in that supplies water, that supplies sanitation, that supplies electricity. And that is actually the part that often takes a very long time. And then also others are questioning, would the entrepreneurs even go for something like this? And I suspect this actually might be a very real problem for government if it wants to innovate in this way. If you came up with a truly efficient way of building RDP houses, let's say you could mass roll out this technology, and I'm a little bit skeptical of the ability to mass roll it out anytime soon. I find that these projects often seem to take longer than anyone is hoping. I hope it does come out pretty soon, but I suspect it'll be a while. But there will, I suspect, be a lot of serious opposition from people who are in the current industry, who are in the current construction industry. You can imagine protests saying this is going to destroy jobs, this is going to deprive people of opportunities, and of course, this is going to interrupt patronage. Hermann, what do you make of all that?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually the greatest, obstacle to this is they don't come plumbed in. They don't come with the electrical infrastructure necessary. But still, the fact that you can build a house within a few hours is still something quite remarkable, and it's a wonderful bit of progress to have this technology developed and getting it cost effective. But the real problem is the unions. This is a government that genuinely believes in job creation for the sake of job creation, whether it is value add or not. And it is largely the philosophy behind much of their infrastructure promises and investments and, the schemes there, thinking that if you pay someone to build something, especially within heavily unionized sectors, that in and of itself is a good. If we were in a country that had, a less regulated building sector, or that unions couldn't dominate or intimidate the areas where they want a sweetheart deal to function, this would be a massive breakthrough. I can see this working in perhaps, and I don't want to be simping for the guy, but in a country like Zambia, with President Hermann, who really seems to understand where you need to come from to solve problems for everyday people. But also, this shouldn't just be seen as a solution to housing in general. This could be seen as a sort of, at the least in the early stages, as sort of a targeted relief for disaster areas. If there's a case, a humanitarian case to be made for this technology being first rolled out to emergency situations where some of the usual constructing guidelines and regulations don't really apply. So we shouldn't just look at the political situation and see, this thing is dead on arrival. There are ways to sort of get the thin end of the wedge into this hegemony. And as I've said on the show before, two significant things happened in 2020 that don't get enough airtime. And that's number one, Gwede Montashe opening the door to the whole concept of IPPs, independent power providers, and of course the Geteleng River municipality court case where residents could fix municipal infrastructure and deliver services on their own dime, but then claim it back from the municipality. That right there is the thin end of the wedge for many of the dominant statist, policies that would make the wide rollout of this type of technology impractical at this stage. But that shouldn't discourage us from thinking that there are ways of getting these types of progressive ideas, and I don't use progressive in the social policy sense of the word, but just in the progress sense of the word. There are ways to get this into the mainstream, and as we saw during COVID, even during COVID, the government clung to its BEE rules, and yet members of the commentariat like Justice Malala, who had long been in favor of race-based policies, even people like Mr. Malala during that time had to concede, right, during a crisis, you don't ask the color of a drowning man, you just save the man. So this is great technology. It's wonderful. It could make a massive difference in cutting the costs that the government spends on housing if government were to endorse this. This also could have some utility for businesses starting to build those worker enclaves, essentially. And it's this brand new old idea where you have the workers' village, where a company sinks a shaft for a mine or buys a shaft, and they need labor, and the company needs to have a secure labor force that is upskilled, that is trained, that is safe and secure. So there really might be this incentive for many state functions to be taken over by businesses that want to provide housing for their workers and their families. And if you could roll this type of technology out to non-statal actors to start illustrating the value of it, I just think it's very valuable. And this type of development is, I think, the state at its best. Because let's not beat around the bush. This is a combination of individuals making a difference, using technology developed partly by state-funded research, but partly by market-funded research. So this type of solution is this type of solution that really makes my heart beat faster. It is something that could really work in practice, and if we are creative enough, we can see a viable route to it. And of course, the big ifs: you need electricity to run a printer, you need people not to steal the parts of the machine, you need unions not to go all Luddite on the machines. There are many reasons why this won't work, but I think we are creative enough as a country to find a way to apply the solution. I think it's exciting. It's not a silver bullet, but my goodness, at least it's a bullet.
Indeed. It's very interesting to think about the possibilities, and I think you expounded on quite a lot of them there of a technological change like this. Although I sort of wonder, in 30 and 40 years, this will be the way that a lot of houses, not just low-end houses, but sort of more upmarket houses get built. Something to ponder. Anyway, let's move on to our next.
If anyone at UJ is listening, a road printer. Just Control P on the N1 or on a pothole somewhere. Just think about that.
In my mind, I just have the vision of one of those old sort of 1990s printers, like sort of printing out a road. Anyway, okay. So on to our next story. This is something that
it downloads the file, but it's like an incomplete file because the modem stopped working because someone used the phone line.
Oh, heaven forbid. Although I suppose we wouldn't notice the difference too much at the moment. Anyway, so this is a story that we think is very important, and we will be covering it over the next couple of years, and this is, or the next couple of months at least, and this is the Electoral Amendment Act. So the Constitutional Court found that it is unconstitutional for people to have to join a political party in order to be represented in Parliament, or at least to be able to be a member of Parliament. And so the court ordered that the legislature had to amend the Electoral Act to make room for independent candidates. Home Affairs Minister Aaron Motsoaledi appointed a ministerial advisory committee to look into how to change the system. The committee came to a version of an electoral system which is basically a mixed single-member constituency and proportional representation system. This was rejected by the minister, though, and they went with the minority advice, which was to create a sort of modified version of the PR structure, so PR's proportional representation, that would allow space for independents to stand. This is apparently the preferred route of the ANC. But there has been a lot of criticism leveled at this bill in its early form. So the Committee of Home Affairs has just adopted a motion of desirability, and so the bill is going to begin moving through the parliamentary process now. There may still be quite a few changes made before it finally gets to be voted on. But there are some concerns. Marius, would you like to talk a little bit about what you've seen from the Electoral Amendment Bill and what your concerns are?
Yeah, it's quite a complicated system. They've effectively trying to allow individuals to be elected in a proportional representation system, a pure proportional representation system, which simply doesn't work. Independents will also be significantly disadvantaged compared to people who are standing for political parties. And depending how it all works out, it could also break proportionality. For example, if 10% of the votes go to independents, a lot of those votes will kind of be wasted or discarded in a way, which means that and now how the formula is set out, the bigger parties will benefit from these kind of distortions. So there's a possibility that exists that the ANC, assuming it's the biggest party, could get 47% of the vote, yet about 52% of the seats in parliament, which is obviously a bit of a problem, and it goes against the reason why we have a proportional representation system and why it was implemented in the first place in the 1990s when we drew up the new constitution and so on. So disadvantage the new electoral amendment bill. It goes by the letter of the Constitutional Court judgment, but not by the spirit of it, nor the spirit of overall how we want to get people involved in the political process and so on. And that's the Parliament's had 2 years to amend this thing. They only started doing it at the beginning of this year. So instead of giving themselves 2 years to do it, they've given themselves 6 months. And now I think there's a bit of panic. Even if this electoral amendment bill goes ahead and gets passed by Parliament, it's not going to pass constitutional muster, I don't think. So there's going to be a lot of problems down the line. There's already now rumblings that the IEC is claiming they're going to have to postpone the 2024 election because they won't have everything in place. I don't see that happening. But it's just, it's another symptom of government's incompetence. People sat on their hands for too long. If this had been addressed, as soon as the Constitutional Court said it must be addressed, it would have been probably all in place now. Would have had a new electoral system which works, which makes sense for people. Would have had new constituencies and everything drawn up as we should. But we don't have that, and we're going to head for. I don't think it's going to be, an existential crisis or a very big constitutional crisis, but it's definitely going to be a crisis. And people are going to be running around and trying to work out what's going on and how to fix this electoral system, this mess that's been created by the ANC. Let's not pretend it's been by any other political party. Yeah, so it's went for an interesting couple of months if you follow this kind of thing.
Right. So on that exact point, the Constitutional Court originally gave Parliament, I think, 24 months to make the amendments. And that means that the deadline is on the 10th of June, so in 9 days, which means the bill is not even close. These things take months and months and months. The bill's no way is it going to make that deadline to final completion. And then once again, as you say, Marius, there still may be problems with it that gets it thrown out anyway. So, Hermann, do you maybe want to talk a little bit about that? There's also, of course, it's also worth pointing out that in response to some of these criticisms, the ANC MPs involved in the committee hit back very aggressively, saying, no one's gonna. This isn't being done to undermine the elections at all. All of that is nonsense. This is all about being thorough in the process of ensuring that there's proper consultation. So, Hermann, firstly, your thoughts on that, and secondly, I must say there is something a little bit unsettling about this. If the ANC had passed this in, 2004, right? I wouldn't have been super happy with it for many reasons, but I would at least be like, okay, this is a change to the system to fix an oversight with the original one. But the ANC is on track, as a lot of polling seems to suggest now, to lose its majority in 2024. At least it's sort of without help from a coalition partner. And this is the moment that they choose to amend the rules in such a way as so that a party that is rather large might be able to just pip over the line if they get 45% of the votes and still get 50% of the seats. That doesn't sound right to me. Hermann, what do you think of all this?
Yeah, no, it is suspicious. It definitely is. But I and Marius and I have been spoken about this over the last few days. you can choose between malice and incompetence. I think the construction of the bill might have some elements of maliciousness, the construction of the system, but the failure to pass the bill, that's incompetence, most likely. This shows how shallow the talent pool of the ANC really has become, because the court judgment held that the part of the Electoral Act is unconstitutional, but that order of unconstitutionality is suspended for 2 years. So that suspension of unconstitutionality originally, Parliament had asked that to be 36 months. And then the court said, no, you get 24 months. And then in April, only a few days ago, the Speaker of the National Assembly approached the Constitutional Court asking for a 6 months extension. And the court came back and essentially instructed all the parties that had appeared before it and argued before it to answer a few questions as to, should they grant this order? And one of them, number one, was a matter of urgency. But then there's also the interesting question aimed at all parties involved, but particularly pointed to the Minister of Home Affairs, saying, please supply reasons why you failed in this regard. Please also supply reasons why the Speaker brought this action, making it a failure of Parliament, rather than the Minister bringing this ask for a delay, making it a failure of government. And it's just an interesting thing that the bill and the design of the system itself, I think, be suspicious about that. It is clearly a party trying to gerrymander its way to some more secure electoral position. But the failure to pass this bill, I think it's pretty much just ANC incompetence writ large. So there are a few things also to consider. And the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission operated from March 2002 and delivered its final report in January 2003. And that was just an exploratory commission. That wasn't constitutionally mandated. There wasn't really a time frame forced on it. It had sort of the 2004 elections in mind, but they could have very, very easily looked at Van Zyl-Slabbert's experience, saying, right, this took 10 months 20 years ago to come up with the necessary research to analyze the system. Perhaps we should factor that into our calculations. Perhaps we should look at because one of the excuses they've given is they had to research a lot of things and talk to a lot of people. And I mean, you really just need something close to the fart of a brain cell to understand that they should have done that. That was inevitable. That was like part and parcel. It's like if you're trying to bake bread, you're like, oh, I need butter and flour and eggs. My goodness, I didn't know it. So it really is a tragic incompetence here, and I'm not as tranquil about the situation as Marius is. I think we are heading to something of a constitutional crisis, where the Constitutional Court will be placed in an immensely awkward position, where it will have to choose between the integrity of the separation of powers or the integrity of democracy. And if you care about liberal constitutional democracy, you should care about both of those things. And the fact that Parliament's failure is so substantive that it's forcing one of the three other branches of state to sacrifice one of those core fundamental principles so that the other can survive. I mean, it's a Sophie's choice or a Zondo's choice in a very, very depressing movie about, just how Parliament is letting everything go wrong. Yeah, Parliament in this metaphor is the Nazis. It's not a perfect metaphor, but how amazing would a biopic of Zondo be with Meryl Streep playing the main role?
That's quite the mental image. Marius, briefly, any final thoughts on this?
I think people shouldn't worry, because the Institute of Race Relations will save the election and save the electoral system. And I see there's a quote. I mean, there's a comment here from Daniel in the comments. If Roodt runs as an independent candidate, can I be his running mate? Yes, you can, Daniel, as long as you promise to make South African cricket great again.
All right. With that, let's move on to our final story. And this is a little bit philosophical, so I don't know if we're going to be able to cover it properly in the last couple of minutes here. But there is a village called Roodt village in Limpopo. It's northeast of Sanin. It's one of the poorest parts of the country. Only 13% of those over the age of 20 in this village have a matric, and a third of its population have basically no schooling whatsoever. It does have a small school in the village for primary school kids that was built originally in 1977 out of mud by the locals. Eventually, they were given some mobile classrooms, those sort of prefab mobile classrooms to kind of as a stepping stone to a formal structure, because the old mud school was falling apart. And the department promised that the formal school would come soon. As it turns out, that hasn't happened yet. And so the local community has gotten very upset. And they decided, some people, to burn down half of the mobile trailers that were being used as classrooms. And as a result, there are now, I can't remember the exact number of kids, but sort of 30, 40 kids squashed into one classroom with grades 1, 2, and 3, all sharing one room. A local teacher said that, this was really upsetting, this whole event, but he also kind of understands where people are coming from, because he said, quote, "The community is now impatient and tired of empty promises from the department, because they've been pleading and writing letters for years for a school." Hermann, what do you make of this story? It's not the first time we've seen this, people burning schools in order to get more schools. I think it speaks to a deep dysfunction in our society.
Yeah, no. If you look at the provincial budgets, you can look at Gauteng, KZN, Limpopo, and even Western Cape, and the damage done to school buildings runs into the hundreds of millions of rands per province. So it probably, over a period of 5 years, might approach very, very high figures. And it's a persistent issue in South Africa, and it's something you said just before we started with the show, was it sort of reflects the toxicity of the relationship between government and the people. And I think that's absolutely right. The people have become so cynical, and the government has become so incompetent, that even the few good things that government can do, the people just refuse to accept, because the failures on the other areas are so crippling. To have a neat little tie back, if the government wanted to, build a few structures with a 3D printer, within a week, within 2 weeks, they could have, the bare bones structure of a school there, if they use the technology available, if they think, perhaps this is a problem worth solving. But short of, 21st century technology, the options, the possibilities to build a basic structure, such as a school, really a school isn't a difficult thing to build. It just needs the bare bones basics of construction. And if the government wanted to, they could build a school out of shipping containers, secondhand shipping containers, or, the options for solving this problem are so multitudinous that one understands the anger of the citizens that, this problem is so pathetically approached by government. But I do think this is a reflection of just the nihilistic cycle of negativity that we have in South Africa. Is nothing is ever good enough. So if you have something, it just reminds you of what you didn't have and what you won't have again. And it sort of reminds me also of what Gabriel once said when he was touring through the country, is the existential nihilism of many of these people who live, you're born, you go to a crap school, you go on to social grants because, the local factories no longer have any incentive to hire you or operate. You have no outlook in life, and you approach the grave increasingly dependent on the state, increasingly poor. I think the nihilism and the undignified, dehumanizing state dependency that the apartheid government and the ANC government have both sort of fed into the psyche of South Africans, especially in your more rural, poor areas. It's a damage the scale of which we will take decades, century to understand, and we can start reversing it at some point. But these are the culture, the very fiber of these communities has been eroded to a point where this sort of action seems rational, and it's tragic. It really is just tragic.
Yeah, this is exactly what I meant by getting philosophical at the last end. But no, well said, Herman. In 30 seconds, Marius, because we're running out of time, any thoughts on the story?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just anger coming from communities. I think for a lot of these people, they've been asking government for whatever, build a proper school, build a road, or whatever the case is. And, of course, there can be change also made at the ballot box. I think for a lot of these people, a lot of people don't see a change. Even if they do vote for somebody else, they don't believe change will come. So they feel that, violence and this kind of, these actions are the only way to do it. Obviously, you don't condone what's happening, but I think you need to understand where this anger is coming from and how to, treat it and actually get people to. Well, actually, we need a government that actually starts looking after people and doesn't, just send them a couple of prefab buildings to replace their mud school that they've had since 20 years, basically before the end of apartheid.
Right. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. We hope that once again you found the show interesting, and we will be back tomorrow with another episode of The Daily Friend. Please subscribe to the video. Please like it. Please leave us good reviews on the podcast apps if you're listening to us on audio only. Anyway, have a wonderful day, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.